today. So thanks. So before we get started, we just wanted to share a little bit about our organization, the Sustainable Economies Law Center. We provide education, research, advice, and advocacy for just and resilient local economies. And what that looks like is lots of different program areas trying to take a holistic view of the economy that we exist in, and then look at our visionary economy of the future and building those the legal infrastructure, the visionary infrastructure, the community infrastructure to be able to meet that visionary future. So that's what we do. And before we get started, just wanted to describe a little bit about some misconceptions and some basic understandings of what lawyers do. So I think a lot of people, when they think about becoming a lawyer, becoming an attorney, they typically think about maybe courtrooms. I know that lots of people have seen like movies and television shows and a lot of litigation, or maybe other people think of, when I become an attorney, I want to become a politician. So they're gonna go to the Capitol and start making laws and changing laws and doing that. But actually, a large segment of attorneys are what we call transactional law attorneys, or corporate attorneys, business law attorneys. And these are all the people who are helping their clients manage risk and navigate different regulations, helping set up organizations and agreements between parties, and help people navigate taxes. And what we saw at the Sustainable Economies Law Center is that all of these attorneys are doing this type of work and greasing the wheels of an extractive economy. Let's see. Yeah. So they're greasing the wheels of an extractive economy. And what we want to do is to grease a different set of wheels. So community gardens, social enterprises, land trusts, worker cooperatives, those are the types of things that we want to be supporting and helping to navigate into the future. And so our work at the Sustainable Economies Law Center, I mentioned earlier, was around the training and education, the policy advocacy work that we do, but a little bit deeper into our theory of change is that we want to envision more just and resilient economic and legal systems, identify and advocate for public policies that remove legal barriers to resilient communities, empower community-based entrepreneurs and innovators to create replicable legal models and structures, educate communities and lawmakers about the potential for new economic strategies, and train the next generation of community-based lawyers to meet the burgeoning legal needs of resilient communities everywhere. And that is why we are here today, is to talk about how we can get more people who might not be able to access conventional, traditional law schools into the legal field without having to incur all the debt, and to be able to do the community-based work that they want to see made real. And so before we begin, I just want to emphasize that the Law Office Study Program is not a program of the Sustainable Economies Law Center. It is a program of the California State Bar. So the California State Bar has defined a few different ways that you could become an attorney. And the most prominent one is going to an accredited law school to become eligible to take the bar in California, the bar exam, and then if you pass, to get your license to practice law. And so when we're talking about the Law Office Study Program today, we're talking about a California State Bar program that we at the Law Center want to support and to let people know about. And we've been doing this for years, but I think one of our biggest supporters has been Kim Kardashian when she became an apprentice a few years ago, and then everybody found out about it. So just wanted to make sure that everyone understood that this is not just this isn't a program of the Law Center, the Law Office Study Program. And that it is a California State Bar program, and you can actually do this in many different places around California and in other states, which we'll get into. So what is the legal apprenticeship? We're going to be going over some of the nuts and bolts and the requirements in California, but at the highest level, every state, to become an attorney in any state, every state has a bar exam that must be passed to practice law in that state. And so the bar exam is administered in each state to assess whether or not a candidate is competent to practice law in that jurisdiction. And the format for each bar exam, each state's bar exam is different. But it's usually broken up into 2 parts, taken over 2 days. And so for anyone who's wanting to enter the legal field and take on clients, they have to get licensed to practice law in the state that you want to be practicing in. And in California, that's the California bar exam. So yeah, and one way to become eligible to take that bar exam is through the legal apprenticeship. The other more traditional ways is to get a JD or Juris Doctorate from an accredited law school, an ADA approved law school. So here are a few folks from the Sustainable Economies Law Center who have done the legal apprenticeship program or are on track in the legal apprenticeship program. So we've had 3 of our staff members become attorneys this way and 1 who is still on track. So really quickly, some other states where this is possible in case you have friends who are interested in becoming legal apprentices and not going to law school. So we have California, but also in Vermont, Virginia, and in Washington. All those 3 states allow students to take the bar exam after reading the law with the help of an attorney as opposed to going to law school. And there's some other states as well, if you know, folks who are interested, where they require at least some law school coursework, but you can complete your 2nd, 3rd, 4th year as a legal apprentice. And so New York, Maine, and Wyoming are states examples like that. And all of this information you can find on likelincoln.org, where we are posting resources for folks who are interested in taking this path. So I'll pass it over to Yasi to talk about the requirements in California.
Yeah. So in California, if you want to begin a legal apprenticeship, you find a sponsor or a supervising attorney, and you begin your study with them. And then within 30 days of beginning your study, you submit your notice of intent to study in a law office or judge's chambers form, which includes a fee, and then you're basically official. So it's a very, you just kind of get started and then you submit that form. And we're going to send you follow-up resources that have links to these forms after the webinar. And we'll send you the webinar slides as well. It requires 4 years of study. And the important thing to note there is that that's a minimum of 4 years. It could potentially take much longer. There are a lot of opportunities to fall behind track. The first real hurdle that you'll face as an apprentice is the first-year law student's exam. Once you have completed a full year, you are eligible to take this exam. Does that mean someone has a question when they're in? Okay. You'll be eligible to take it after 1 year of successfully studying. Thing is, you don't have to take it immediately. You have 3 basically administrations of the exam that you can either try and take the exam and pass, or you can sort of forego taking the exam. For example, in my case, when I was after my first year, I decided to not take the exam after once I became eligible for it. So I missed my first chance, and that's fine. The next time it became available to me, I took the exam and I passed it. You're probably going to consider things like, am I ready yet? Is it worth spending that money and failing, etc. But the important thing to remember is you only have 3 chances to take it and pass it. If you don't pass it within 3 administrations, then your time, basically the clock stops at 1 year and you start losing time. Nothing will count until you have successfully passed the first-year bar law student's exam. Once you've passed that point, then there's really no official examination until the bar exam itself, which is upon the completion of 4 successful years of apprenticeship.
And how often is the first-year law student's exam offered?
It's offered twice a year. So I did mention that there's only 2 exams, the first year law students exam and the bar exam itself. However, there are monthly examinations that that you and your supervising attorney create and administer for you. With those examinations, you can get really creative, and you can actually decide to do set your own topics for those examinations and make them as useful as possible for your supervising attorney, the work you're doing together, or for yourself and your own legal interests. So we really encourage you to get creative with those. Another way you can lose time is by failing to submit your 6-month reports on time, and making sure that you really have your ducks in a row. You have your 6 examinations, you make sure you include the right fees, you include your hours studied and the materials that you've studied. And it's very important to be very rigorous about all of those processes, and follow the rules very carefully. Something that I always like to mention to people who are interested in following this track is pitch to your potential supervising attorney that they only need to commit to you for 6 months. And then, at month 4 or 5, you can reassess and see if this is something that is working well for you too, and you can re-up on that. Saying that this is a 4-year program to an attorney who's never heard of the program or might be sort of nervous about taking on an apprentice might really throw them off. So being able to commit to just 6 months is a way lower ask, and it's something that might help you in finding a sponsoring supervising attorney. And it's also really helpful for you if you're interested in testing out a variety of different topics and areas of law.
And sorry, before we keep going, if you have questions, we'll have time to answer those questions. And if you're on your computer, feel free to type in or into the chat box any questions that you have.
Cool. So there's a lot of benefits to doing a legal apprenticeship. You save money. Law school is very expensive. You can set your own schedule with your mentoring attorney. And that's really helpful for those of us who are also working at the same time. You get hands-on experience, which is something that not a lot of law school students actually get when they're in law school. And for many people, law school is not that attractive for a lot of different reasons. It's not necessarily welcoming. It doesn't accommodate different learning styles. And it's basically taking a large chunk of your life out and committing it 100% to being in school, as opposed to continuing to do other important work or having a family and whatnot. It's far more flexible doing an apprenticeship. Another benefit is that if you're not going to law school and you're doing legal apprenticeship, you don't even have to take the LSATs. And another thing that I like to share with people is that, sure, legal apprenticeship takes 4 years and law school takes 3, but for law school, you have to study and take the LSAT, and you have to apply to law schools, which basically takes a year in and of itself. So they might be considered somewhat on par in terms of time commitment. Another benefit is that with legal apprenticeship, you're working in a firm or with an attorney for 4 years. That means that you are not just talking to students and reading textbooks, you're actually making professional contacts that might help you out in the future when you want to establish your own practice or take on clients. And the other benefit is that, again, you're not necessarily ripped out of your current life. You get to stay where you want to live. You get to serve the people who you want to ultimately serve, and you make your professional contacts where you are, not where you're studying. That being said, there are a lot of challenges, and it's important to be real about those challenges. It takes a very long time. It's very self-directed, and that can be good in many ways, and it also can be bad. I mentioned before that it's difficult to find a supervising attorney, and there's some strategies that you can employ, and you should join our Facebook group and things like that. But again, it's probably getting easier to find a supervising attorney now that thanks, Kim. Kim Kardashian is an apprentice, and it's not so shocking to hear that you can become a lawyer without going to law school. I think it's becoming more common, so that's great. Let's see what else is here. Yeah, like I said, it's very self-directed. It can be a bit isolating, especially if you don't have a cohort that you're working with. It's a long time of just studying by yourself. And just for me, so I'm already an attorney. I've successfully passed the bar exam, but just thinking about the bar exam for 4 years by yourself is a very daunting way of existence. I also mentioned before, there's a lot of harsh policies around loss of time. So if you miss a report, or if you don't pass the first year law students exam on time, mind you, if you don't pass the bar exam within your first try, then the time adds up. Yeah, and then there's very little support from the bar itself. So hopefully that will change. But for us, over the past 5 to 6 years, the apprentices at the law center didn't feel like there was a lot of support from the bar. And another drawback is that if you're not intending to stay in California, or if you're not sure whether or not you'll stay in California, there's no reciprocity with other states currently. So that means you can't really take the bar exam outside of California. You're not eligible to sit for those examinations. And there might potentially be a sort of stigma around being a lawyer that didn't go to law school. For most of my interactions, people have thought that it's incredibly cool. But again, if you're trying to get into corporate law, they're looking for potentially the name of your school rather than your experience and your character and whatnot. So something to keep in mind depending on where you're trying to go with this. Okay.
Awesome. Yeah. I'm just going to scoot over here. Hello, everyone. I'm Tia, and I'll be one of the mentors at the Radical Real Estate Law School. And so I asked Yossi and Ricardo if I could do a plug, because we are extending our application timeline by a week. So instead of having your application be due this Friday, it will be next Friday. And we're just super excited to announce the Radical Real Estate Law School, because we hope to recruit up to 4 apprentices, and we're looking for someone specifically who's interested in becoming not just any type of lawyer, but a radical real estate lawyer without going to law school. And that means you're someone who wants to rethink real estate, dismantle private property, and return land to the commons. So if that's something you're interested in, please apply. You can apply at theself.org/jobs. And I'll just tell you a little bit about what it would look like if you join our Radical Real Estate Law School. The typical week at the Radical Real Estate Law School would have 8 hours unpaid, where we hope you'd study together with your cohort. And we're suggesting that it be in the morning on Monday and Thursdays, but that's flexible. And then we'd have 10 to 20 hours paid, and that's where you get on-hands experience as an apprentice. You'd work with our clients like the East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative and other clients that are dealing with real estate. You could help us coordinate event and workshops. We'd hope that you'd be interested in building partnerships and coalitions with us, and creating materials for educational purposes and other work to help us with our programs here at the Sustainable Economies Law Center. And the reason why we have created an 18 to 20 hour to 28-hour work week is because you actually have to be in this office for 18 hours. And we also just wanted to give you an opportunity to get paid a little bit more than 18 hours. But one of the questions I've received a lot from potential applicants is whether you can do this remotely, and unfortunately, you cannot. But you have more time to think about it, and we are going to extend the application deadline to March 20th. And if you have questions, you can ask them after the rest of this presentation. Thank you, Yassi and Ricardo.
Thanks, Tia.
Yeah, that reminds me before we keep going, I don't know if we touched on the requirement of number of hours per week. Is one of the California requirements for the legal apprenticeship is that you study 18 hours a week in a law office, and 5 of those 18 hours have to be under the direct supervision of your supervising attorney. So how we've interpreted that to mean is that 5 hours you have to be physically in the same place as your supervising attorney to meet those requirements. And those requirements are then reported on what Yassi mentioned earlier, those 6-month reports that you submit to the California Bar to let them know that you're continuing to study and to get credit towards your 4 years. So yeah, so next Yassi and I are going to share just a little couple minutes about our experience doing our legal apprenticeships. So Yassi, you want to take it away?
Sure. So I would say the reason why I started the legal apprenticeship was I was considering going to law school for a certain period of time, and I just heard from law students at the time that it was prospects for getting a job were really low, and debt was really high, and it was just they didn't have a very good experience. And so I sort of crossed law school off my list of options for graduate level study, and I got a job at the Sustainable Economies Law Center that I loved, and I loved the work that we were doing here. This was a long time ago, and I'm still here after 8 years because I got to do a legal apprenticeship. I actually got to work full-time doing work that I loved, and also accomplish my educational goals. So yeah, I would say my case is the best case scenario where it only took me 4 years. I got to work full time while I did it, so I was earning money. I wasn't getting into debt. So I feel really grateful, and I feel grateful, and I also know that that's like it's really challenging. So much can go wrong, and so it's important. I always try and like really emphasize to people like so much can go wrong, and it's sort of the bar exam. I feel like passing it really doesn't depend on your skills or how smart you are. It's a lot of it is luck, and a lot of it is how well you test. And so just I would say be real with yourself about how you study, how you succeed, what you need to succeed, and be real with yourself about all of those sort of like constraints that this program has.
Yeah. Speaking of getting to do the legal apprenticeship and the work that you love to do, in this photo is Yassi receiving an award from the National Business Association of Worker Cooperatives and Democratic Workplaces, the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives, for being the Cooperator of the Year for doing policy work to support democratic worker ownership around the country a couple, 2 years ago, I think. So not only was Yassi doing the legal apprenticeship to become an attorney, she was already doing the impactful work that she wanted to see in the world. So just, yeah. And to Yassi's story, I'm the counterexample of all the things that can go wrong. So what was it? How I got into the legal apprenticeship was I'm from Southern California, I'm from Long Beach, and folks from the LA area were looking to start a worker cooperative incubator. I was part of this study group to see what resources we needed, and I came up to the Bay Area to interview technical assistance providers and worker owners and developers. And one of those folks was Janelle Orsi. who was the founder of the Sustainable Economies Law Center. And halfway through my interview of her, what the legal needs for worker cooperatives were, she started asking me some questions about my future. And at the time, I was planning on going to grad school in Europe to do international conflict resolution. And she said, how would you feel about coming up to do worker cooperative development and becoming a lawyer without going to law school? So after sitting with my head in my hands for a good hour and a half after that meeting, talked to my partner, and we decided to come up to the Bay, and I started working at the law center. That being said, I have had a long learning journey for myself. I'm still not an attorney. I'm in my final year of apprenticing. I've gone through 2 attorneys, and Tia is going to be my 3rd supervising attorney for my final year. Part of the reason why I've taken almost 7 years to get to this point is because, like Yasi was mentioning, the first year law students exam, if you don't pass it within the first 3 administrations of becoming eligible, you can continue to take it, but you only have 1 year counted towards your 4. And I passed my the first year law students exam on the 4th administration after I became eligible. So effectively, I lost 2 years. Also have had some personal events in my life that have really pushed me to take a step back during the last couple of years of studying. And so I was able to take about a year off from submitting my reports. But that's one of the benefits of this program, is that when you have life events that happen, when you need to take a step back, when you need to take a breath and reassess, you can continue with the program. And so when you submit your next 6-month report, you change the dates of when you were studying, just to make sure that they receive it within the eligibility period of that reporting time, which is in their regulations and sheets that we're going to share with you. So yeah, my hope right now is I'll become eligible to take the bar exam this year, and take the bar exam in February of 2021. So that's my current path. So yeah. Mm-hmm. Do you want to share a little bit about your experience finding a mentor?
Yes, I had a similar experience. Janelle Orsi, the co-founder of the Law Center, also convinced me to become her apprentice. And yeah, I was actually, as I mentioned, working at the Law Center already, and I was planning to go to graduate school, but she offered me this alternative. And again, it was just a matter of sitting with the question of graduate school or apprenticeship for a couple hours. And I realized at the end of it, I literally made a pro and con list, which I highly recommend. Mm-hmm. And I really didn't have many on the pro side for going to graduate school. I really found the option to do practical, profound, powerful work in a team and at an organization that I found really inspiring, so much more exciting than going back to theory and sort of learning that's extracted and separated from real life. So I felt like this was a really good fit for me. And so I accepted, and I was actually apprenticing with the same mentor, supervising attorney, for 4 years. So I didn't actually do mentor switches as some of my other apprentice friends have done. In terms of apprentice friends, I'm so glad that I had apprentice friends, because if I didn't, I would have lost my mind. I feel like just the camaraderie and the fact that there are others who are going through the same experience with you, even if, we got together for study sessions now and again, and they weren't necessarily the most useful for learning, but it was absolutely essential for just having a cohort and a group of people to share their experience with and just be supportive of each other. So I would really recommend finding at least another apprentice near you that you can meet up with once in a while and just check in and have someone else who understands your experience.
Do you want to share a little bit about your supervisor apprentice? Yeah.
Sure. I would say that, and that's a good question, because I think I keep slipping up and saying mentor, and it's not a mentorship position necessarily. It can be, but I think it's really important for you to clarify the roles, as the apprentice, what your role will be, and as the supervising attorney, what your role will be, so that you're clear on the level which you can depend on each other for different things. I think for my experience with my supervising attorney, it was good and clear and useful. And I think, given the caliber of person that I was um, apprenticing with, it wasn't reasonable to expect like a very deep mentorship relationship. And I found over a period of time that it was important to seek out those experiences and relationships with other people. So you'll find, depending on the person that you're apprenticing with, and your work and your experience, you're going to have several components that you'll need to sort of create for yourself and maintain for yourself over time. And it's important to identify different places you can bring those all together for yourself, so you have a well-rounded and enriching experience.
Thanks. Yeah, I think I don't know if there's anything else we want to share about maybe we can
Study.
How to study. Let's see. So I have, through this whole process, I've found that studying alone has been very difficult for me, especially to keep myself accountable, and just more and more has taught me that I'm someone who learns in community. And so it's really important for you, as you try to enter this path, to just reflect on how much community you need to be able to support you, like Yasi was mentioning. Sometimes it's a super light touch, and other times it's like we're going to set up a weekly study session where we all just get together to learn. So that's one thing. Another is that our supervising attorney, Janelle, would set up sometimes to do some trainings. And so I'm really excited about the Radical Real Estate Law program, because it's going to build some more infrastructure for folks to be able to learn who are participating in that program on a more regular basis. But otherwise, I have like a Google sheet that I kind of put out all the different subjects that I'm going to be studying, and gave myself time periods to study within each subject. And that's how I organized it. And we have plenty of old Themis and Kaplan and Barbary, all these like companies that put out bar prep programs. We have all of their resources, because once law students take the bar exam, they have these thick books of outlines and resources, and they never need to look at them again, and they're just basically doorstops. So they'll donate them to us, and then we give them to other apprentices. So even if you don't participate in our Radical Real Estate Law program, we have a wealth of resources here for you to borrow to study for the bar exam, because basically what you're doing is you're just studying for a test for 4 years. That's what you're doing here. You're not really learning necessarily how to be an attorney for the study component. It's just how are you gonna pass that test, and all the real experience comes from the other work that you'll be doing. So yeah, it's a little bit about how I prepared to study. I don't know if you want to share anything.
I wrote a little blog about it on likelincoln.org, and I'd recommend you take a look. It's especially about how to study for the baby bar. But I would say the best thing for me, given that I was working throughout my apprenticeship, was to set aside very clear, distraction-free times for study, where I wouldn't check my email, and it was blocked off on my calendar. It took me a while to actually get to that point where I learned how it worked. So I hope that my failures will be useful for you all, and you can just hit the ground running. Just creating very specific times and blocking that out, and being accountable to yourself, I would say, is the best way to go. And then in terms of materials, for about the first year, I was patching together materials that I would buy online and whatnot. And I realized that I preferred to buy into like a bar prep program that was more cohesive and had a whole like course of study mapped out for me. Even though we did a pretty good job ourselves of putting together the topics, I liked going through a bar prep program. So I actually signed up for a bar prep program, paid half the cost for the bar prep so that I could use the materials for the first year law students exam, which is just contract law, tort law, and criminal law. And then after the baby bar, I decided to pay the other half for the full bar materials. And I think that worked really, really well for me. The last thing I'll say is that no matter how smart you are, and again, these exams are not testing how smart you are, they're testing how well you test. I would just say that given that, crunch time is totally necessary, meaning like you really have to set aside time to cram before the exams. And so just be able to plan for that. So you know if the baby bar is coming up, you take a couple of weeks off of work if you can, or work half time or something like that. All of us at the Law Center did something like that before our examinations. And it's good to just be clear with your employer far ahead of time that that's something you're going to have to do.
So here's just a few other ways to get involved with the Sustainable Economies Law Center, whether you join the Radical Real Estate Law School or not. If you're an apprentice and looking for other opportunities to like flex the legal skills that you're going to be wanting to do once you become an attorney, we have our Resilient Communities Legal Cafe that we do 3 times per month, where you can come and sit in on actual client consultations. Folks, I know from the last few times, it's like navigating permitting, but for a off-grid retreat center that's all holistic, or helping folks navigate employment law who are starting a worker cooperative, or other folks who are trying to start a land trust. So really interesting conversations and legal issues to allow yourself to like get excited as you're moving through pretty boring legal studies at times. Another is the East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative, which the Radical Real Estate Law School actually do a lot of work to support, and they're a really amazing organization. You can see more of their information on ebprec.org, and actually there's a podcast that just came out yesterday called The Response, where it's about, I think, half an hour, 45-minute conversation just on the ebprec, its model, and what it's doing. Another project of ours is the People Power Solar Cooperative, which is trying to do energy democracy in the Bay Area and trying to make it replicable to communities outside of here. And we also do our policy cafes, where we talk through how to start a policy campaign and what the legislative process is and those types of things, which is really useful because if you're learning all of this legal knowledge, it's really useful for communities as they're trying to navigate a policy process. So here's some resources that we'll share after about the Radical Real Estate Law Program, like Lincoln.org, the Facebook group, and I can share that podcast as well after this. So. Yeah. But yeah, now this is just like our time to talk, just coffee talk. So this is where we can just like have a conversation with y'all. We're done with our formal presentation. So thanks for joining us for that. But otherwise, yeah, do folks have questions?
They do. We have 2 questions. One is, can you talk about your study curriculum and how that differs from the traditional law school curriculum?
I can
Yeah,
address it first. In law school, from what we hear, you're not necessarily learning the bar topics. Like Ricardo mentioned earlier, you're basically studying for the bar exam for 4 years when you're doing a legal apprenticeship. Because, of course, you can diversify your curriculum. You can study all sorts of things that don't actually appear on the bar exam. But at its core, you can just focus on that because that is your target. So in law school, you learn all sorts of interesting things that don't necessarily show up on the bar exam. And so that's why law students, even after 3 years of study, have to enroll in a bar prep course, pay a couple $1,000s for it, take time off, basically a month to study, and then take the bar exam. So what we're doing is we're basically doing the bar prep program for 4 years.
Oh,
No, that was great. Yeah.
and if you don't know specifically what kind of law you want to go into, are you able to study more general law until you figure that out?
Yeah. That's a great question, because basically whoever you're studying under, that area of law, that if you're participating in their work in their area of law, that's the thing that you're going to get really deep knowledge around. And so that's sometimes why it's good to switch attorneys, to be able to learn different areas of law and what that actually looks like. So our colleague, Chris Tittle, who was a legal apprentice and became an attorney through the apprenticeship program, actually at one time was with a wills and trusts attorney, and so was doing a lot of that work. And at another time was working under, who were some of the other attorneys that Chris worked under?
Linda Alvarez, I don't know what you did.
Yeah, I think some like property law stuff, I think, and then also just like the transactional law. So it is good to find different attorneys, and if you are really passionate about a particular area of law, then you should probably find an attorney who does that type of work. So like if you're really interested in doing immigrant justice, immigrant rights, finding an attorney, at least at some point in your apprenticeship's journey, that you find an attorney who's doing that type of work. Otherwise you might not even, because it's not tested on the bar exam, you might never experience it in the work that you're doing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Mm-hmm. I just received another question. It is, if you join the Radical Real Estate Apprenticeship Program, can you still focus on other areas of laws like labor laws, immigration laws, etc.? I guess I should answer that question. The answer to that is yes, because the Radical Real Estate Law School program is only a 1-year program for now. And if you can find a lawyer that will mentor you, that will supervise you in these other areas of law, then you can venture out and do that too. There is another question. If you are interested in environmental justice law, rights of Mother Earth legal frameworks, what would you recommend?
Yes.
In the context of studying, I don't know. Like, there's rights of nature is like a sort of movement that's happening. But yeah, I don't know necessarily what the question is asking specifically about.
Okay.
Well, if I can take a crack at that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think if you're interested in a particular area of law, especially if it's sort of connected to or just adjacent to the law center's work, that we actually have connections with a lot of those attorneys who are doing that work. And so we could be a potential person to connect you to those attorneys to see if they're interested in being your supervising attorney. And so every attorney has the autonomy to decide whether or not they're going to take somebody on, but we could be acting as advocates for y'all if you're trying to get somebody to supervise you. And in fact, in the past, what we've done, like Yasi mentioned earlier, we have likelincoln.org, where we, I think was it you or Chris, somebody wrote a blog post about how to find a supervising attorney and some strategies and techniques. And one of the resources that we've provided in the past is just to be people like for your supervising attorney or potential supervising attorney to call and talk to about our experience or with our supervising attorneys, just to like hear from a peer or somebody who's gone through it, like what that actual experience is like. So, so if you're interested in rights of nature and that type of work, you can still do that type of work through the legal apprenticeship. But it's not going to show up on the bar exam. So, yeah.
Awesome. You got a thank you from that answer.
Hey!
If you apprentice and pass the bar in California, then move to another state that doesn't allow you to read the law, are there paths to becoming a lawyer in that state other than going to law school?
Yeah, no.
Wow.
So, yeah, just as a as a point around reciprocity. So, so every state in the country, no matter if you go to law school or become an attorney without going to law school, every state has an agreement with other states around who can practice law in another state if they're licensed to practice in their current state. So for example, there's plenty of states that have agreements with each other so that if you're licensed to practice law, say in Montana, that like Wyoming and Utah will this is, I don't know if this is actually true, but just hypothetically, if Utah and Wyoming, they'll have an agreement that says if you are licensed to practice in one of these 3 states, that you can practice in any of these 3 states, and that you don't have to take an exam to practice. California has 0 reciprocity. They have no other state that they say if you are licensed in New York, if you're licensed in Louisiana or Florida, you can practice law in California. They say, no, you have to be licensed in California from the California bar exam to be able to practice in the state. And so since California set that up, every other state says, okay, well then you cannot come to our state to practice law. If you are licensed in California, you have to take the bar exam in our state to practice law, even if you're licensed in California. And so that's a separate issue than whether or not you are able to become an attorney in another state. So it's right now, our understanding is that if you become an attorney through the legal apprentice, the law office study program in California, that you would have to do another state's law office study program or fulfill their obligations and requirements to become an attorney there, probably going to law school. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Another question is it easy to find supervising attorneys who are also radical in the sense of radical real estate law? And how do you find them?
Well, I live in a bubble where everyone is radical. But I would say maybe look for like the National Lawyers Guild and other legal organizations like that, or associations that sort of have a political stance or do political work, and maybe focus on asking attorneys there as your starting point, and maybe ask them if they know other attorneys, and sort of build out your strategy for finding a supervising attorney that way. Yeah, what would you say?
So the other ways that I've seen people become attorneys through the law office study program that aren't associated with the law center is that they are actually paralegals at a law firm, and so they just talk with their employer, who's the attorney, and see if they can start this legal apprenticeship route, because they're already doing the work at the law firm. They're already in that office every week, every day, and so that's how I've seen other people do it. And sometimes it's not even like people who share our values, radical values. They're just conventional law firms, but the paralegal is able to talk an attorney there into becoming their supervising attorney. So that's another route, is to find a law firm, and hopefully you can find one that shares your values, and see if you can become a paralegal, and through that work become an apprentice. So I know another organization that promotes the law office study program is the United Farm Workers down in the Central Valley. And they have a law office. They've been facilitating a law office study program like our Radical Real Estate Law School for many years. And that's primarily for people from the communities in the Central Valley to become attorneys for those farm workers in the Central Valley. So if anybody's on the call from there today, that's a resource.
Mm-hmm. All right, another question is for me. It says, are you able to attend this program more than 1 year? I think what they mean is the Radical Real Estate Law School. And that does depend on many factors. One is staff capacity to supervise apprentices. One is funding. We don't know if we have enough money to fund you all for 3 years. For 4 years, sorry. And another factor is if you don't want to become a real estate lawyer, then you might want to apprentice somewhere else, like what we've been discussing. And then the follow-up question to that is, well, can we continue 4 years until with us as their supervisors? And it depends. Will any of you be our supervising attorney? I would be one of them, and Janelle would be one of them. You have to actually be a lawyer for 5 years before supervising an apprentice, and that's why Yasi isn't going to be one yet, because she's 2 years a lawyer. But in 3 years, I'm going to try to recruit Yasi to become a supervisor with me. That was my first invitation, sorry. So for how long?
I accept.
Yeah. Okay, we're gonna have 3 supervisors in 3 years. And then for how long will you be offering supervision? It's a minimum of 1 year, hopefully 4 years, but that depends on all of those different factors. All right.
Yeah. And I think one other thing that maybe we mentioned, but just in case we didn't, each supervising attorney can only have 2 legal apprentices under them. So, and that's something that we've tried to talk to the California Bar to change and to modify to allow 3 or 4 at least apprentices under a single attorney, but they haven't changed that. And in fact, back in the early 80s, we had heard that there was no cap, and so there were some attorneys who were supervising 5 or 7 or 9 apprentices at one time. So maybe something bad happened back then, and that's why they changed it to 2. But yeah.
Another question is something I missed earlier. It was, can somebody who becomes a lawyer this route practice international law, like in cases involving war crimes and such?
Ooh, federal jurisdiction question.
International.
Yeah, I don't know what the requirements are for practicing law on an international. Yeah,
I don't either.
Yeah.
Fun fact, you don't have to be a lawyer to sit on the Supreme Court. I hope that's true. I think that's true.
That sounds right.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Also, just going back to the previous question about radical lawyers, the Meiklejohn Civil Liberties Institute is another one that offered legal apprenticeship opportunities. So you might want to look into them. We posted a past apprenticeship opening on our Facebook group and on likelincoln.org, so you can find more information there.
Yeah, and we can share that link in the follow-up resources as well. And just Yasi actually reminded me of Esquire Apprentice. It's a program in San Francisco that is primarily focused on, I think, women and people of color to become attorneys through the Law Office Study program, and they have an educational curriculum that they've created. And so we can share a link to Esquire Apprentice as well as another resource if the radical real estate law school isn't the thing that you decide to do.
And I think the last question for today is, how can the radical real estate law apprentices help the UC-wide COLA for All movement? And I do not know what the COLA for All movement is.
I think that's the Wildcat strike.
Yeah, cost of living adjustment.
Cost of living adjustment. Oh,
yeah. Yeah, I mean, how can, so, I don't know. You want to answer?
I don't know.
I don't. I haven't.
Sky's the limit.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah.
Exactly. What do you think?
We've. I can't share very much, but we've already been contacted by some folks to support that work, and the fact that I'm a legal apprentice here means that if our organization were to participate in supporting the COLA strike, that I could potentially be supporting that work through through the Sustainable Economies Law Center. I'm not involved with housing work at our organization. I focus on worker cooperatives. So, but if you are part of this radical real estate law school, then when these types of things happen, that's when you'd be able to jump into action and do the legal research and analysis and really help those activists navigate and propose tangible solutions against the existing power structures.
Awesome, what a great note to end on. Thank you, Ricardo and Yasi. Thank you everyone for attending. I will send you the slides and links that we suggested you check out. All right.
Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate you joining today. Yeah, Colin, what's up?
Y'all are getting a bunch of thank yous, by the way, in the chat.